The sky today carries a feeling of transition that's subtle but unmistakable once you slow down enough to notice it. The sun continues moving steadily through Aquarius, holding a wider, more observational perspective, while the moon has just entered Sagittarius, still at the very beginning of the sign. This early degree moon matters because it doesn't talk about results yet. It talks about motion before meaning, direction before destination. At the same time, Mercury and Saturn are sitting at the final degrees of Pisces, and Venus is at the very end of Aquarius. These edge-of-the-sign placements create a sense of standing between chapters, where one inner story is quietly closing while another hasn't fully announced itself. This combination often creates an inner shift that's more felt than understood. You might not be able to name what's changing, but you can sense that something is rearranging itself beneath the surface. There's an openness in the air, a feeling that life is slightly wider than it was yesterday, paired with a tenderness that asks you not to rush. Aquarius gives distance and perspective. Sagittarius adds forward pull, and Pisces dissolves what no longer holds emotional weight. Together, they set a tone that says, notice first, decide later, and don't confuse the two. Rather than feeling like a push to act, this sky feels like a pause with awareness. You may notice moments where you're looking at your life from just far enough away to see patterns instead of details. At the same time, there can be a softness, even a slight fatigue, as old expectations quietly lose their grip. This isn't a dramatic ending or a bold beginning. It's the space in between, where your system is recalibrating without asking for your effort. Today's inner shift isn't about doing more or fixing anything. It's about sensing where momentum is starting to build and where pressure is naturally releasing. When you let yourself register that contrast without trying to resolve it, you align more easily with the rhythm of the day. This is a moment for awareness over action, for listening before moving, and for allowing the sky to set the tone rather than forcing your own. As this sky begins to register more clearly, the first place you're likely to feel it is in your body, not in your thoughts. The moon in early Sagittarius often shows up physically before it becomes mental. There can be restlessness in the legs or hips, a subtle urge to stand up, stretch, walk, or change your environment, even if you don't act on it. It's the body sensing forward movement before the mind knows what it wants to move toward. This kind of restlessness isn't anxiety. It's more like stored momentum looking for a channel. At the same time, Mercury and Saturn in late Pisces soften and slow the internal pace. This can create a very specific bodily experience where part of you wants motion, while another part feels heavy or tender. You might notice it as shallow breathing, a sense of pressure behind the eyes, or a low-level fatigue that doesn't match how motivated you feel. The nervous system can feel slightly out of sync, like signals are arriving at different speeds. Nothing is wrong here. This is simply how mixed transits speak through the body. Throughout the day, you may notice small signals that are easy to overlook if you're moving too fast. Tightness in the jaw when you feel rushed to respond. A drop in energy after committing to something too quickly. A subtle sense of relief when you delay a decision or choose not to engage. These are early cues, not warnings. They're the body's way of letting you know where alignment exists and where it doesn't, before the situation escalates emotionally. Mars in Sagittarius can add bursts of physical energy that arrive suddenly and leave just as quickly. You might feel capable and driven for a short window, then notice your energy drop off once you actually start doing the thing. This stop-and-go rhythm can feel frustrating if you expect consistency from yourself. But if you pay attention to the timing, you may realize your body is asking for shorter cycles of effort followed by rest rather than sustained pushing. Jupiter in Gemini adds another layer to body awareness by stimulating the nervous system. You might notice more mental stimulation translating into physical sensations like jitteriness, restlessness, or an urge to multitask. The body may feel more alert, but not necessarily more grounded. This is a good moment to notice how information affects you physically. Does scrolling energize you or drain you? Does conversation open your chest or tighten it? These responses are data. Today, body awareness isn't about correcting anything, it's about noticing patterns early, before they turn into tension or exhaustion. When you stay curious about these sensations instead of overriding them, you give yourself a chance to move with the day rather than against it. The body is already responding honestly to the sky. Listening to it is the first form of integration. As these internal and bodily signals move into the background, they begin to shape how the day unfolds in practical, everyday ways. This is where the experience becomes more noticeable in your schedule, your conversations, and the small decisions you make almost without thinking. You might sit down to plan your day and realize that what looked reasonable on paper feels heavier once you imagine actually doing it. Tasks that require sustained focus may feel more draining, while things that allow movement, flexibility, or curiosity feel easier to approach. In communication, this energy often shows up as pauses. You may open an email or a message and find yourself rereading it, not because it's confusing, but because your response doesn't feel fully formed yet. Mercury in Pisces doesn't rush language. It wants timing to match feeling. Saturn there adds a sense of responsibility around words, making you more aware of how what you say might land. As a result, conversations may feel slightly unfinished or delayed. This isn't a breakdown in communication. It's a sign that not every exchange needs immediate resolution. At work or in daily responsibilities, the stop-and-go rhythm becomes more apparent. Mars and the Moon in Sagittarius can bring bursts of initiative, moments where you feel ready to move forward or take action. But if that action isn't aligned with your current energy, fatigue can follow quickly. You might start something enthusiastically and then feel the need to step back sooner than expected. Rather than seeing this as inconsistency, it can be more helpful to recognize it as feedback about pacing. Socially, Venus at the final degree of Aquarius can create a subtle sense of emotional distance. You may notice yourself observing interactions instead of fully participating, especially in group settings or familiar dynamics. Small talk can feel especially draining today, while more honest or spacious conversations feel easier to tolerate. This isn't about withdrawing from people, it's about conserving energy and noticing where connection still feels meaningful versus where it's maintained out of habit. Decision-making today benefits from softness. Jupiter in Gemini supports exploration, brainstorming, and gathering information without forcing conclusions. You might find it easier to consider multiple options without committing to any of them. This can be useful if you let it remain open-ended. When you try to lock something in too quickly, the body may respond with tension or resistance. Throughout the day, pay attention to moments where you instinctively slow down, postpone, or change course. These aren't delays to overcome. They're quiet opportunities to adjust your rhythm before energy leaks turn into exhaustion. In this way, the day offers small chances to work with your limits rather than discovering them the hard way. The core pattern of today is a stop-and-go rhythm that doesn't want to be fixed. It wants to be respected. Energy arrives in waves instead of lines. There are moments of clarity, motivation, or honesty, followed closely by the need to slow down, pull back, or pause. This isn't inconsistency. It's a natural response to a sky that is asking different systems inside you to operate at different speeds. Mars and the Moon in Sagittarius are responsible for the forward pull. They activate the part of you that wants movement, truth, and expansion. This can feel like a sudden urge to speak plainly, take a risk, or move towards something that feels more alive. At the same time, the Pisces emphasis through Mercury and Saturn is dissolving old emotional structures. That dissolution takes energy. Even when you feel motivated, part of your system is still releasing what it no longer wants to carry. When those two processes overlap, the result is momentum followed by fatigue. This pattern often creates the feeling that you should be able to do more than you actually can. You might think you are ready to move forward, only to notice your energy drop once you begin. The frustration that comes from this isn't a sign of failure. It's the body and nervous system negotiating a more honest pace. When expansion and release happen at the same time, efficiency naturally decreases. What increases instead is sensitivity to limits. Jupiter in Gemini adds mental curiosity to the mix, which can make the stop and go pattern more noticeable. Ideas multiply quickly, perspectives shift. You may feel mentally stimulated even when physically tired. This can lead to overextension if you mistake mental interest for available energy. The pattern of the day invites you to separate curiosity from obligation. You are allowed to explore without committing, to think without acting, and to imagine without immediately producing results. Emotionally, this pattern can feel like a quiet leak rather than a dramatic collapse. Energy drains through small decisions, unnecessary explanations, or staying engaged in situations that don't require your full presence. Venus at the final degree of Aquarius highlights this clearly. You may notice that certain interactions feel slightly off, not harmful, just outdated. Continuing to participate out of habit can slowly deplete you. Pulling back, even subtly, can restore balance faster than pushing through. What makes this pattern difficult is that it doesn't announce itself loudly. It whispers, and most people miss whispers. There is no clear crisis to respond to. Instead, there is a series of small signals. A sense of relief when something gets postponed. A drop in tension when you choose not to respond right away. A moment of clarity when you allow yourself to do less than planned. These are indicators that the stop-and-go rhythm is working as intended. Rather than trying to smooth this pattern into something more linear, today asks for cooperation with it. Movement followed by rest. Curiosity followed by integration. Action followed by listening. When you respect that rhythm, energy stops leaking and starts circulating again. The pattern of the day is not about doing less forever. It's about learning when to move and when to pause without turning either into a problem. This pattern becomes easier to understand when you look at how the sky is layered today. Sagittarius and Pisces are speaking very different languages, and both are active at the same time. Sagittarius energy, carried by the Moon and Mars, wants honesty, direction, and expansion. It pushes awareness outward. It asks big questions, seeks meaning, and looks for movement that feels purposeful. This part of the sky is future-facing. It's interested in where things are going, not in perfecting where they've been. Pisces, on the other hand, is doing something very different. With Mercury and Saturn at the final degrees of Pisces, there is a process of emotional closure happening that doesn't rely on logic or decisions. Pisces dissolves. It softens edges. It loosens attachments quietly, often without clear mental explanation. Saturn there adds weight and realism, making you more aware of what you can no longer sustain emotionally. Together, they point to endings that are internal first, long before anything changes externally. When these two energies overlap, the system is asked to expand and release at the same time. That's why the stop-and-go rhythm appears. Expansion requires energy. Release also requires energy. Doing both simultaneously naturally reduces capacity. The body senses this before the mind does, which is why fatigue, hesitation, or loss of urgency can appear even when motivation is present. This isn't a contradiction, it's a transition. Venus, at the final degree of Aquarius, adds another subtle layer. This placement often corresponds with re-evaluations of connection, belonging, and values. Aquarius steps back emotionally to see patterns clearly. At the final degree, that observation reaches a point of completion. You may feel less emotionally available for dynamics that once felt normal, not because something went wrong, but because your values are shifting quietly. The desire to participate less isn't withdrawal, it's alignment adjusting. Pluto in early Aquarius reinforces this theme in a quieter but deeper way. Pluto here doesn't demand dramatic change. It changes how power is distributed internally. It highlights where you give attention, energy, or emotional labor automatically, and where that exchange no longer feels equal. Pulling back in these moments can feel unfamiliar at first, especially if you're used to staying engaged no matter the cost. But this withdrawal isn't loss, it's redistribution. Jupiter in Gemini supports this process by encouraging observation rather than conclusion. Gemini gathers information. It notices patterns across conversations, thoughts, and ideas. Jupiter expands that curiosity, but doesn't insist on commitment. This is why today works better when you allow yourself to explore without locking anything in. The sky supports awareness far more than certainty. Taken together, the astrology explains why the core pattern of the day feels subtle but persistent. There is forward pull, internal release, and value recalibration all happening at once. The system responds by slowing, pausing, and adjusting pace. The sky isn't asking you to understand everything consciously. It's asking you to trust the signals that arise as these layers realign. When pressure drops, it can feel unfamiliar, even unsettling. But that discomfort is often the signal that something more honest is trying to take its place. This is where many people fall back into an old interpretation that no longer fits. When energy slows or motivation drops, the reflex is to assume something is wrong. The mind often reaches for familiar explanations like laziness, avoidance, loss of discipline, or even self-betrayal. But today's sky tells a different story. What looks like hesitation on the surface is often discernment underneath. And discernment is what shows up when you stop running on adrenaline. What feels like pulling back is frequently a sign of self-trust beginning to replace overextension. There's an old pattern many people carry, especially those who are sensitive, perceptive, or used to being the steady one. Movement is equated with worth. Pushing through becomes a measure of strength. Pausing feels dangerous, like something might be lost if you don't keep going. Under this sky, that pattern gets quietly challenged, not with force, but with fatigue, not with confrontation, but with a simple loss of urgency. The system no longer responds to pressure the way it used to. Seen through this lens, the stop-and-go rhythm of the day is not a flaw to correct. It's a recalibration. You're not losing momentum. You're changing how momentum is generated. Instead of being driven by obligation, fear of falling behind, or the need to prove capacity, movement begins to come from clarity and choice. That shift can feel uncomfortable at first because it removes the familiar adrenaline that once kept you moving. This is also where the older spiritual narrative of constant expansion quietly falls apart. Growth doesn't always feel like more energy, more passion, or more drive. Sometimes it feels like a reduction in tolerance for what drains you. It feels like the inability to force yourself into spaces that no longer fit. Under today's sky, restraint is not regression, it's precision. When hesitation shows up, it isn't asking to be overridden, it's asking to be listened to. Slowing down doesn't mean you're stepping back from life. It often means you're stepping out of patterns that required you to absorb more than was ever yours to carry. In that sense, the reframe of the day is simple but profound. You're not becoming less capable. You're becoming more selective about where your capacity goes. To move through this day with more ease, the invitation is to relate to time and effort differently than usual. Instead of asking how much you can get done, it helps to ask what actually feels aligned to engage with right now. Alignment today isn't abstract or philosophical. It shows up in very practical ways, often through the body. A subtle exhale when you cancel something non-essential, a softening in the shoulders when you give yourself more space between tasks, a sense of steadiness when you choose not to respond immediately. Sagittarius energy benefits from perspective, not pressure. Small horizon moments can be surprisingly regulating. This might look like stepping outside for a few minutes, taking a longer route somewhere, or letting your eyes rest on something that reminds you your current situation isn't the entire story. These moments don't solve problems, but they change how the nervous system holds them. When perspective widens, urgency often dissolves on its own. At the same time, the Pisces influence asks for gentleness with your internal world. This isn't a day to demand emotional clarity from yourself. Feelings may come in waves or layers. Let them pass without trying to organize them too quickly. Hydration helps more than you might expect. So does reducing sensory input when possible. Lowering the volume, dimming the lights, or taking short breaks from screens can help your system integrate what's already moving internally. One of the most useful practices today is noticing your first response before you override it. Before you agree, notice your breath. Before you explain, notice your chest. Before you push forward, notice whether there's energy available or just momentum. These moments of noticing don't require you to change your decision. They simply bring honesty back into the process. Often, that's enough to prevent unnecessary energy leaks. Later in the day, especially when impulses feel stronger, it helps to slow reactions just enough to distinguish truth from tension. Acting from truth tends to feel clean, even if it's firm. Acting from tension often carries a sharp edge or a sense of relief that fades quickly. You don't need to judge either response. Just recognizing the difference allows you to choose more consciously. Integration today isn't about fixing or optimizing anything. It's about respecting the rhythm that's already present. Movement followed by rest. Curiosity followed by quiet. Engagement followed by space. When you allow those cycles without labeling them as problems, the day becomes much easier to navigate. You don't need to do less or more. You only need to do what fits the moment you're actually in. As the day begins to wind down, there's no need to gather it into a conclusion or turn it into a lesson. This isn't the kind of day that asks for answers. It asks for recognition of what has already shifted, even if you can't fully explain it yet. Recognition of what feels lighter when you stop carrying it, and what still feels heavy enough to deserve your care and attention. You may notice toward the end of the day that certain things no longer pull at you the way they used to. A thought you didn't chase, a conversation you didn't need to finish, a decision you allowed to remain open. These moments aren't avoidance, they're signs that your system is learning to trust timing again. When pressure drops, clarity doesn't always rush in. Sometimes it arrives as calm. There's also no need to forecast what comes next. The sky today isn't pointing toward a specific outcome, it's orienting you to a position. Standing between what has quietly ended and what hasn't fully formed yet. That in-between space can feel uncomfortable if you rush to define it. It becomes supportive when you allow it to be undefined. Resting there, even briefly, lets the next direction emerge naturally instead of being forced. If there's one thing to carry forward from today, let it be this. You don't have to absorb everything that moves around you. You don't have to respond to every signal or carry every emotional current you encounter. Slowing down isn't retreat, it's discernment. It's how you protect clarity before it's fully visible. As you close out the day, let yourself be exactly where you are without needing to improve it. The sky has already done its part. Your only task is to stay present with what you noticed, Trust the pace that revealed itself and allow tomorrow to meet you without you rushing to meet it first.